The Light Blues by Snabelhausen. Read by The Viridian Ghost. Summary. In a round of Truth or Dare, Kirishima dares Izuku to change his look and dye his hair. With nothing to lose, the boy agrees, and soon enough he finds himself with light blue curls. But why do Aizawa and Yamada suddenly look like they've seen a ghost every time they look at him? Has he done something wrong? Alternatively, Izuku's hair reminds Aizawa and Yamada of Oboro. Truth or Dare. It was just after dinner on a typical Friday. Most of the students in 1A have already headed out for the weekend, their caretakers having picked them up as soon as their classes had ended. Still, not all students have left the dorms behind. For one reason or another, Izuku, Kirishima, Uraraka, Shinso, Ashido, and Kaminari had all decided to stay in UA over the weekend. And like Ashido had so kindly put it, this meant loads of bonding time, which in turn is how they ended up playing Truth or Dare in the common room. Having gone around almost the entire group in the past hour, it was finally Izuku's turn to answer the dreaded question. He gulped audibly, sending a pleading look in Shinso's direction, only to be met with a wide smirk. Traitor. Truth, please. Aw, I was really hoping you would pick Dare, Ashido complained. You're the only one here who has a quirk quick enough to steal Aizawa-sensei's sleeping bag. At that suggestion, Izuku looked mortified and thanked his lucky stars that he had gone with, and would continue to go with, Truth. Especially since Todoroki wasn't here to pester him about his relationship with All Might. Izuku was thankfully spared from replying to Ashido when Uraraka spoke up. Oh, I've got a question for you, Deku. Is your hair actually green? Kaminari and Ashido quickly began whining at Uraraka, seemingly annoyed with her choice of question, when they apparently had some juicier ideas. Since all Izuku could do was stare. Huh? What do you mean? He stammered. Oh, I just meant to ask if you dye it, like Kirishima, Uraraka said casually, earning a squawk from the red-headed boy, whose face now seemed to match his hair. Nothing wrong with if you dye it or not. It was just curious, since green isn't a very common hair color, she explained. Oh, I see. Hate to disappoint you all, but it's all natural, Izuku answered with a sheepish smile. He had to suppress his laughter at Uraraka's comment, though. She'd really considered his freaking hair color as odd when one of their best friends was literally a frog. Izuku was pulled out of his thoughts by another question. Have you ever wanted to dye your hair? Uraraka looked at Izuku curiously. Oh, I'm not sure. I haven't really given it much thought, honestly. I never saw any reason to dye my hair, Izuku mumbled. At the admission, he was met with a small frown coming from Kirishima's direction, although it disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced with a playful glint in his eye. You know, Midobro, sometimes you don't need a reason. I didn't really have one either. I just wanted to try something different. Izuku didn't really know how to reply to his friend, so he merely hummed, prompting Kirishima to continue. Aren't you even, a little bit curious? It's really manly. There aren't really any cons to dyeing your hair, except maybe disliking how it looks. Even then, it's easy to fix it and just dye it back. Izuku was admittedly a bit curious, and had been for a while, even though he had just denied it. He could tell that Kirishima knew that Izuku was actually considering the outlandish idea. Under any other circumstances, he would have likely declined it immediately. But All Might had been telling him to just be a teenager for once, and to live a little. Dyeing one's hair could be considered just that, right? I don't even know what color I'd do, or even how to do it. Izuku tried one last time, although he silently gave up as soon as he heard the excited squeals from his classmates. They knew he practically agreed to it already. No problem, both me and Denki know what we're doing, so we can help. As for the color, Kirishima's grin grew wider. Truth or dare? I'm highly suggesting you pick dare. Izuku knew to pick his battles, and honestly, he'd rather fight Stain again than argue with Kirishima about this. Dare, then. Great! I dare you to let us pick the color and dye your hair while you're blindfolded. The red-haired boy beamed. Even with every cell in his body screaming at him to decline the dare, Izuku knew it was a lost cause. Not knowing whether he was agreeing to the best or worst idea of his life, he simply nodded his head and sealed his fate with a groan. Monday finally rolled around. Izuku had already gotten relatively used to his new hair color. Not only that, but he was finding himself actually liking it, more than he'd ever expected to. When Kaminari and Kirishima had revealed Izuku's now light blue curls, Izuku hadn't been able to stop himself from doing a double take at the sight of the person staring back at him in the mirror. Sure, he knew he'd given his friends permission to do whatever they wanted, but he hadn't ever imagined them picking this color for him. It was just so very different from his usual hair color. However, when Kaminari and Kirishima had sheepishly explained that they'd simply chosen the color because they associated it with Izuku's sunny personality, any remaining doubt that had been washed away, and Izuku had unironically beamed at the duo. Taking the compliment for what it was, and allowing himself to simply own his new look. By the time it was time for class, almost all of Izuku's classmates had complimented his hair, either the previous night or at breakfast. Many of them had silently teased him for his apparently increasing sunshine vibes, as they put it. But Izuku realized he didn't mind it. If anything, he was just happy to look more like he felt. It had been much to his own surprise that Izuku did feel similarly to what Kirishima had described once regarding his own hair. Not like a new person, but perhaps a truer one. In just 2 days, Izuku had already noticed his confidence growing, most notably in the form of his decreasing stuttering, and it seemed the others were taking note of this too. Izuku couldn't tell if All Might had been more shocked about his hair, or at the teasing tone that Izuku had shamelessly used during their training on Sunday. Either way, Izuku was happy and heading towards his first class of the day together with Ida and Uraraka. The trio separated at the entrance of the classroom, each heading towards their own desks and waiting for the bell to ring. As soon as it did, the entirety of Class 1A immediately quieted down to turn to stare at the door, patiently waiting for their ever-so-tired teacher to appear. Within mere seconds, the door slid open. A grumpy-looking Aizawa sensei entered the room with a large mug in his hands. Nothing out of the ordinary. Or at least, not until 3 more seconds had passed, when 1A sensei finally turned to sweep his gaze over the students for the sake of attendance. Only to nearly choke on his coffee, the whole class tensed, looking mildly concerned for their teacher's antics. Aizawa sensei, however, seemed to recover quickly, launching into his lecture without much of a second glance at his students. Izuku almost thought that it seemed like his sensei was refusing to look at them, but he quickly shook it away and focused on the board until the bell finally rang once again. Packing his things and looking at his friends, Izuku couldn't help but notice that Aizawa sensei had already disappeared from the room. This caused the boy to slightly frown. He'd been meaning to ask his teacher about an upcoming assignment, and since All Might had been the one supervising the dorms this weekend, Izuku hadn't run into his sensei since Friday. However, before Izuku could ponder any further, his frown quickly turned into a smile when Sue started chatting to him about what she had done with her siblings over the weekend. He eagerly conversed with his friends all the way to English, where he excused himself to his seat, yet again waiting for class to start. Yamada-sensei entered the room soon enough, with a wide smile on his face as he cheerfully greeted his students with an enthusiastic "Yo!" Izuku happily returned his teacher's smile, only to be met by a sudden voice crack. His face twisting in confusion, Izuku noted that it almost seemed as if his teacher had been startled somehow. The voice hero had never lost control of his voice. Ever. Either way, Yamada-sensei quickly gathered his composure and began teaching, although Izuku could tell that the man wasn't as energetic or upbeat as he usually was during their classes. He didn't even shoot any finger guns at his students. Then, at the end of class, for just a second, Izuku could have sworn that he caught his teacher staring straight at him, with an almost bitter look on his face, racking his brain for any possible explanation and coming up empty. Izuku simply ducked his head and focused on completing his work. He'd just have to ask his friends at lunch. Midoriya, are you joking?" Uraraka stared at him, eyebrows raised. "What? No, I really don't understand why Sensei would stare at me like that," Izuku spluttered. The boy had brought up his previous observations regarding Yamada-sensei and even Aizawa-sensei's behavior during lunch, hoping that his friends could provide him some insight on what's going on. Apparently, there was something he was missing. "You completely changed the way you look over the weekend," Shinso supplied, helpfully picking up his food. Oh! Izuku had completely forgotten about his hair. His classmates had already seen it, but he failed to take in the account that nobody else had. They were bound to be shocked by it, right? Light blue was rather different than dark green after all. Izuku still had that nagging feeling that there was something more that he hadn't noticed, but he decided to let it go for now, or at least until he could learn something new. Allowing himself to get dragged into a conversation regarding whether Hawks liking chicken nuggets was qualified as cannibalism, Izuku pushed the matter into the back of his mind. And the matter was soon enough pushed back into the front of Izuku's mind. As the week went on, he noticed that his teachers, Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei more specifically, were behaving oddly around him. Neither would look at Izuku in the eye, even if they looked in his direction to begin with. Moreover, would disappear from the classroom in a blink of an eye, never allowing any student the chance to ask them any questions, even regarding the work assigned. Izuku could maybe have just dismissed all these observations if it wasn't for the fact that he knew it was personal. Sure, his teachers could have not been making eye contact with any of their students, and they just didn't leave just him in the classroom when they disappeared. Still, Izuku knew it had to be something to do with him specifically, as he'd personally caught Aizawa-sensei running away from him when they'd run into each other in the kitchen. Izuku had also seen Yamada-sensei flinch when one of Izuku's friends had loudly compared the blue-haired boy's hair to a cloud. Even Midnight-sensei, who'd overheard the comment, had looked at Izuku as if she'd seen a ghost. And honestly, Izuku didn't understand any of it, and it was starting to hurt, and to become a little more resentment of his teachers at Aldera. Izuku was sure that his friends were right. The initial weirdness had started when Izuku had dyed his hair. Still, he couldn't figure out what could possibly translate to this level of odd behavior. Izuku had quickly dismissed the only theory he'd been able to think of, that his sensei simply didn't like the color. Neither Aizawa-sensei nor Yamada-sensei seemed to be the type of teacher or even people that would care about or judge someone's looks, especially not the color of someone's hair. Still, this dismissal meant that Izuku now had no idea why his teachers were acting so oddly, It really made him want to scream into a pillow, which he did, several times. Desperate for an answer, but too afraid of confrontation, Izuku's brain instead steadily started supplying him with the next best theory, namely the idea that perhaps he'd done something wrong. It'd been over a week at this point, and the boy was beginning to withdraw into himself, reverting back to his old ways of fidgeting with his hands and not being able to focus during class. He'd even considered dyeing his hair back to green, but he really didn't want to have to explain the situation to his friends, so he'd refrained. All in all, Izuku couldn't shake the concern that maybe he had somehow angered his teachers, even if he had no idea how dyeing his hair could do that. By the Thursday of Izuku's second week with dyed hair, he was taking short naps in between classes since all the anxiety he was feeling made sure to keep any proper sleep at bay. Izuku knew he couldn't go on like this for much longer, but also lacked anyone to turn to help. His previous experiences of telling his classmates had ended up with him being punched, so he didn't even want to imagine how tattling on teachers would work. Even All Might felt unapproachable. Come Friday morning, Izuku was tired, too tired to get out of bed. His head hurt from the lack of sleep. His eyes prickled from the need to cry, and so, despite having near-perfect attendance, Izuku did something he'd never even considered before. He decided to skip school. Of course, Izuku was too paranoid to just show up in class, so he sent his friends a text message letting them know that he wasn't feeling well, asking them to tell Aizawa-sensei for him. Izuku found it was overwhelmingly nice to just lay in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, not having to wonder whether his heroes hated him or not. So, naturally, that was when Izuku was reminded of the fact that good things rarely last long. For just as the greenette finally let himself shed some quiet tears, there was a firm knock on his door. Anxiety pooled in Izuku's stomach, but he stayed quiet, only a small sob leaving his throat. Another knock could soon be heard, followed by a tired voice. "Problem, child?" Izuku froze. He texted all his friends to tell his sensei that he was feeling off. Had he not? Why was Aizawa-sensei here? This was the exact opposite of what he wanted for today. His teacher couldn't seem like this, feeling sorry for himself. "Kid?" Aizawa-sensei spoke again. "Are you there? I need to make sure you're okay. It's not like you to miss class." Izuku almost fooled himself by the sincerity in his teacher's voice, almost letting the small whimper escape him. Still, that was apparently enough for his sensei. "Midoriya, I can hear you in there. I need to check on you. Can I come in?" "Tell me now if there's a reason I shouldn't." Izuku knew by his sensei's tone that he'd need to talk to Aizawa-sensei before the man would even consider leaving him alone. Still, Izuku refused to openly invite his sensei inside, because now he was growing a bit angry. Yet Izuku's lack of sleep and increased paranoia, combined with the abandonment issues that were definitely contributing to his state of mind. But so was his understanding of basic human decency. Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei had been ignoring him for the past 2 weeks, and now the former was here, apparently pretending to care about Izuku. For a minute or so, Aizawa-sensei warned Izuku a final time before twisting the doorknob and entering the boy's room. Izuku was sitting on his bed, back pressed against the corner of his room, a big blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His face showed a clear signs of crying, but his gaze was surprisingly alert, almost sharp. He soon eyed his sensei warily, before suddenly blurting out the only thought his stutter completely gone. "Why are you here, sensei?" Izuku's eyes remained fixed on his teacher, who, for the first time in weeks, was actually meeting his gaze. The man seemed just as tense as he had been since that Monday, but his eyes shone with worry, the sight of which made Izuku's stomach turn. Not only that, he'd been back down at just the thought. I told you, I came to check on you, problem child. If you're sick, you need to tell a teacher, not your friends, his teacher said. And that was when Izuku had enough, and so gathering every last drop of courage he had, he pierced his teacher with the most disappointing look he could muster. I'm sorry, Sensei. I probably would have told teacher if they didn't hate me, and tried to avoid me at every turn. Izuku spat out, quickly ducking his gaze away from Aizawa Sensei's eyes. He felt another wave of sobs rack his body, but he didn't care. He didn't even care about the fact that his teacher probably wouldn't expect... I see. Huh? Izuku had been bracing himself for scolding, so the rather tame response from Aizawa Sensei had him looking up at his teacher, only to find him texting? Izuku's thoughts immediately spiraled. Was he texting Nezu or campus security? They wouldn't throw him out, right? Relax, Midoriya. You're not in trouble, came his teacher's voice through the fog that was rapidly forming around any coherent thought Izuku could muster. I just need some help for... And that was when Izuku stopped listening, only hearing the blood rushing to his ears as he felt a familiar iron hand enclosing on his throat, on his lungs, and suddenly he couldn't breathe, almost panting where he sat, his arms tightly around his knees. All he could think about was how stupid he had been, lashing out like that. But what else was expected, right? From a useless nerd like him? Izuku was barely aware of him sputtering an apology, after sounding more and more hitched like sobs. And then, what felt like an eternity later, he began registering a grumbling voice that he'd so often found himself thinking of as safe. Even now, with everything that had happened, he couldn't help but place his last bit of trust in that voice, in his sensei. Rita, can you hear did you really breathe? Please, Izuku. At the mention of his given name, the boy finally managed to begin pulling himself back to reality, a small hint of awareness appearing in his eyes. Izuku could make out the dark figure of Aizawa Sensei crouched in front of him, face twisted in a pained look of concern. The man was still muttering calm assurances at him, even going as far as to giving him a breathing pattern to follow. Still, Izuku was having trouble leveling his breathing, so when his teacher reached out to offer the boy his hand, Izuku was too exhausted to do anything but accept. Within seconds, he found his own hand placed on Aizawa Sensei's chest, over a rapidly beating heart. Izuku could now feel his teacher's deep breath, if not slightly exaggerated breath, and was finally able to properly ground himself from his own breathing evening out soon enough. Of course, that's when he registered footsteps and another voice just outside the door. Sho, little listener, you in here? Yamada Sensei. Was that the help Aizawa Sensei had been referring to? Why was he here? All of the confusion was driving Izuku right back to the brink of a panic attack. Before he could spiral too far, though, Aizawa Sensei squeezed his hand, not enough to hurt, but enough to let Izuku know he was there, all while shushing him and muttering small affirmations. Is it alright if Hisashi comes in? He's only here to help me make this better, I promise. There was a short silence, and Izuku searching his teacher's face for any ill intent. He finally gave the man a small nod. Aizawa Sensei gave Izuku something that might have resembled a smile, before calling out for Yamada Sensei. Hisashi, you can come in. Seconds later, Izuku's door slowly opened, revealing a concerned-looking Yamada Sensei. When his eyes met Izuku's, the man simply gave the boy a sad smile. Hey there, little listener. I heard Sho and I had caused quite a mess. Yamada Sensei spoke carefully. Now, Izuku was more confused than ever, something that was clearly evident on his face if Aizawa Sensei's snort was anything to go by. Yes, problem child. We're the ones in trouble, not you, the man says. We both owe you an apology. What? Izuku practically squeaked. He knew the way he'd been treated wasn't nice or normal by any means, especially with no apparent reason for it. But he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that his teachers were trying to apologize to him. It just didn't happen. Izuku watched as Yamada-sensei and Aizawa-sensei shared a long, pained look, until the former reached out into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Turning to face Izuku, his face was clearly, silently asking for permission to move closer. A query to which Izuku easily agreed to with a nod. Sitting down on the edge of Izuku's bed, Yamada-sensei slowly spoke while he opened his wallet. Like Shota said, we are here to apologize to you. There's no reason good enough to warrant the way that we've been treating you, or how we've made you feel. And we're so sorry about that, little listener. It was extremely unprofessional of us to let our personal emotions get in the way of our duty to teach you and to make you feel safe. We're also sorry it took us so long to realize our behavior was affecting you so negatively, and that you felt like you couldn't talk to us for the past few weeks. We've both failed you as teachers, and we are very sorry to have lost your trust. As grown-ass adults, we should be able to behave accordingly, Aizawa-sensei added. At Aizawa-sensei's cursing, Yamada gasped loudly, sputtering a quick language before turning back to Izuku. Now, like I said before, there's no reason good enough to justify the way Shota and I have acted recently. But we both feel like you deserve to know why we behave so incompetently, even if there's no way it makes it all okay, alright? Izuku nodded slowly at the man, who proceeded to produce a small photograph from his wallet, and handing it over to Izuku. It was a picture of 3 teenage boys, 2 of them clearly being Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei. The third boy, however, Izuku sucked in a small breath at the realization. The third boy looked to be of the same age as Izuku's teachers, with a blinding smile, rosy cheeks, and most importantly, light blue hair. Izuku understood now. His teachers didn't even need to say anything. Izuku turned over the photograph to find the name Oboro Shirakumo scribbled on the back. With Izuku's new hair, he looked almost exactly like Oboro, and based on the sad looks on his teachers' faces, the fact almost hurt them. Izuku felt his face twisting in guilt. Something had clearly happened to this Oboro, something horrible enough for his teachers to act like this, just because of a lookalike. Although Izuku, rationally speaking, knew that there was no reason for him to feel guilty or sad for simply having dyed his hair. He still did, because as much as Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei's actions hurt him over the past 2 weeks, Izuku still cared, and something he did hurt his heroes. So Izuku did what he did best. He burst back into tears, apologies and promises about dyeing his hair green again falling from his lips faster than he could think. Then, before he knew it, he was being pulled into a hug. Long, yet strong arms wrapping around him firmly. At first, Izuku tensed up, before simply melting into the hug, taking comfort in the warmth that Yamada-sensei was radiating. He could vaguely make out his teacher's soothing voice and slight cooing, and he could feel himself calming back down, finally daring to look back up at the two heroes in his room. Problem child, you are not the one who should be apologizing. You've done nothing wrong. Yeah, little listener, the only thing you did was find yourself a rocking hair color. No need to change it. It's not your fault that Shota and I couldn't control our emotions better. Nemori, too, Yamada-sensei added. Nemori? Izuku asked, still in his sensei's firm hold. Midnight, kiddo. She's not in the picture, but it's only because she was the one who took it. The 3 of us were close to Oboro, Aizawa-sensei explained. Oh! Izuku's mind was spinning with questions, but looking at the sad smiles painted on his teacher's face, he didn't dare voice any of them, lest he hurt them more. Aizawa-sensei must have picked up on this, though. Ask your questions, Midoriya. We won't be offended. Yes, talking about Oboro is hard for us, but it's also what keeps his memory alive. He's right, little listener. I think I think he would have really liked you. Yamada-sensei smiled. Really? Yeah, kiddo. He was sunshine incarnated too. Just as much of a problem child as you. Aizawa-sensei huffed. Izuku giggled slightly at that. I think he looks very kind. I'm sorry for whatever happened to him. The boy spoke, lacing his words with as much sincerity as he could. Thanks, little listener. You're right. He was very kind. He was the type of person who'd adopt every kitten he'd ever come across, just so that they wouldn't have to be alone. He passed away during his internship here at UA. That's why Shoto is so strict with you all, making sure you'll all always come back from the field. Yamada-sensei said softly, while looking fondly at Aizawa-sensei. Izuku had also turned to look at his homeroom teacher, who has an increasingly sad expression. The usually stoic man was, to Izuku's surprise, on the verge of tears, and turning away from his student as if to hide the fact that he was actually showing his emotions for once. So, as much as Izuku recognized Oboro to have been a very lovely person, of importance to one Aizawa-sensei and Yamada-sensei, at that, he had no interest in continuing to pry for more information about his lookalike, especially if it was causing his teachers this much anguish. Instead, wiggling out of Yamada-sensei's hold, Izuku quickly shuffled over to the edge of the bed before sliding down onto the floor, next to his other teacher. Without warning, the boy simply squeezed himself into the space underneath Aizawa-sensei's arms, quickly wrapping his arms around his teacher's torso. On any other day, Izuku might have been mortified to try and give his sensei a hug, but today felt right. Izuku felt his teacher's breathing hitch for a second, before he once again was being wrapped in a tight hug. The trio still had lots to talk about, and Izuku was pretty sure they all needed therapy, but for now, he simply let himself be held, knowing that both himself and Aizawa-sensei needed it. And if Izuku's teacher ran his fingers through Izuku's curls, all while whispering, calling them so fluffy, then that was no one's business but the trio's. Okay, that was The Light Blues by, hold on, just scrolling up to the top, by Snabelhausen. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced the author's name in this one. I tried my best, I looked it up, and that's all that I could find. Been a while since I posted. Again, I don't really have a schedule that I stick to. I just kind of do it when I have lots of free time, because it takes quite a while to get the best takes out of all this, even though you can still hear some mistakes in there. If you have any recommendations of what I should podfic, just leave it in the comments. Then I'll ask the author if it's okay. Yeah, that's about it. This is the Viridian Ghost signing off. See you next time.